Hello, today we will be discussing the fifth chapter of the Art of Rhetoric by Aristotle. And in this chapter, after describing in the fourth chapter the topic of political oratory and the things that political oratory concerns, Aristotle then goes on to define in the fifth chapter the concerns of a man, after just discussing the concerns of a nation in the fourth chapter. He is now honing in on the concerns of a man. And he opens a chapter by describing happiness. He says happiness is the common aim of all men. And his definition of happiness is interesting. It's almost like a recipe within recipes. He defines it as prosperity combined with virtue. So prosperity being the good condition of property and body, and virtue, well, virtue he doesn't actually discuss in this chapter. He goes on to define virtue in later chapters. He just focuses on prosperity in this chapter. And he says that all human activity, in his opinion, is concerned with increasing happiness. So we ought to do what makes us happy, and we ought not to do what makes us less happy. And that's a really natural concept to us. But interestingly, it's a concept that has been laboured over the centuries and millennia, and particularly his definition of happiness being not only to do with the internal state of a human being, but also the external state. That is something that is not common to all societies. And again, in this chapter, you see the palimpsest or the faint traces of later philosophies of the latter part of the second millennia. For example, he defines happiness here as the secure enjoyment of the maximum of pleasure, which sounds suspiciously similar to Benthamite utilitarianism, which underpins modern economic theory, and also much of modern budgeting and policy decisions made by democracies. So Aristotle goes on to taxonomize the constituents of happiness, and common sense, as often classical philosophy is, happiness is good birth, plenty of friends, good friends, wealth, good children, plenty of children, a happy old age, also such bodily excellences as health, beauty, strength, large stature, sorry to the short kings, athletic powers, together with fame, honour, good luck, and virtue. A man cannot fail to be completely independent if he possesses those internal and those external goods. So it comes down to independence or freedom. That seems to be the underlying virtue that is not kind of explicitly stated as the ultimate aim, but is kind of alluded to in this text. And as I mentioned before, you have goods of the body and the soul, which he defines as internal goods. Interesting that he defines the body as an internal good. And then you have goods of birth, friends, money, and honour. Those are external goods. And there's also resources and luck that make a life really secure. So Aristotle then goes on to define each of those constituent parts of happiness, starting with good birth. And his definition of good birth is quite peculiar. He says that a good birth is to be born from an indigenous, i.e., you're born in a nation that your ancestors occupied or have been there from the beginning of the quote-unquote history, or ancient. And this relates to commentary by Plato, who said that one of the ways to imbue credibility and power to a nation is to make the nation, or the people of the nation, out to be much older than they actually are. And that's one of the noble lies. So if you can make people feel that they are practicing a religion that was the first religion, or are of a nation that they were the first people there and they were there for a long time, then that will give that nation credibility and robustness. And Aristotle, he says that a good birth can come from the female or the male side. So, not both of your parents have to be honourable, although it would be good if they both were. If one of your parents was honourable, whether male or female, that would be good, and that is actually different from some matriarchal societies or matriarchal religions, whereby honour is conferred from one side of parentage only. And the founders of the line need to have done something good. They have to be virtuous or wealthy or have some notable deeds on their list of achievements. So much for good birth. He then goes on to define possession of good children and of many children. That is kind of self-evident. Now, he goes on to define wealth, what it means to have wealth. He says it's, the things we would expect, having money and territory, so land and money or specie. But he also says that the wealth needs to be productive, i.e. we need to use it. He says there's no point in having a lot of land or a lot of property if you don't use a property and you don't benefit from it. And he also talks about security of the wealth, which is defined as the right to dispose of that wealth or keep it. So much like the libertarians talk about, it's a right to not have your wealth coercively taken from you. You need to have the right to keep that wealth, to use it, to destroy it as well if you wish. Fame is about having qualities that are desired by all men and being respected by everybody, or being respected by the good and the wise. So it's okay if the unwise or the bad hate you, as long as the good or wise love you. Honour is being famous for doing good, and doing good, another definition of Aristotle of good here is the preservation of life, wealth, or of doing good things that are hard to get, so doing something notable, and the constituents of honour, the sacrifices, commemoration in verse or prose, and of course he's probably thinking of Homeric poems, civic celebrations, state burials, privileges, grants of land, statues, public maintenance, obeisances and giving place among foreigners, the last two. And those are the marks of honour. It describes the excellence of body, and that's health. And health is kind of we all know what that is. And then he talks about beauty as well. And when he talks about beauty, for a man in his prime, it's fitness, and for an old man, it's being strong enough to go about your daily life without pain or undue exertion. He then defined athletic excellence, and he mentions a few sports. Sprinting was one of them, or running, boxing and wrestling, and one who can do all three of those things to a high standard is called an athlete. Happiness is also defined along a dimension of time. Happiness in old age is basically aging slowly and painlessly. And he says that there's a bit of luck in that, for there are many people with good health that come upon issues into later stage of their life, and there are many people who weren't particularly healthy that live a long life just out of luck. And then Aristotle goes on to make more definitions. He says it's good to have many friends, and friends are people that do what he takes to be good for you. So friends who want the good for you, who want good outcomes for you. Aristotle concludes by talking about luck. And luck means possessing most, or the most important of the good things which are due to luck. And what things are due to luck? He says that good things that excite envy are, as a class, the outcome of good luck. So he ties luck to the emotion of envy. Things that people are envious of are also things that are due to good fortune, luck, the accident of birth in a given location, of birth to good genes, of birth to good parents, and so on. And he talks about luck in different circumstances. For example, he mentions, if you're handsome and all your brothers are ugly, you're lucky. If you find a treasure, you're lucky. If a missile hits the next man that misses you, you're lucky. And if you have not gone to a place recently that you usually go to, and people go there for the first time and are killed, but you're not, you survive, you're also lucky. So there's a bit of morbid humour and contrast in those closing examples, but they illustrate fairly clearly what luck is. And it's remarkable that, Aristotle, or someone actually took the time to define these things, because we all take them for granted. But I'm sure at the time people were in disagreement about these things, and of course for good reason, because they can be questioned. The definition of happiness can be questioned, definition of virtue can be questioned, and luck and so forth. And on the definition of virtue, Aristotle says that virtue is concerned with the subject of eulogy, which is the oration, celebratory oration that is made at a person's death, that recounts their actions throughout their life and their character. And the implication there is that political oratory isn't really concerned with the virtue, it's concerned with happiness ex virtue, with making people richer, healthier, stronger, more independent, luckier, and so forth. But politicians and political oratory isn't concerned with discussing virtue. And I think that's because politicians want to please everyone. They don't want to highlight the people that are at least useful for their office in a democratic context. They don't want to highlight the wrongdoings of those people, even if those wrongdoings exist. And that is discussed in the 6th chapter, which hopefully I can upload shortly. Thank you very much for your time.